Meeting held in the Joe N. Idlet Junior Teacher Education Center. Today is Wednesday, May 24th, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. The time is 8 a.m.
Madam Chair, may I have the floor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Barefoot.
As you recall from the discussion back on April 24th, we had lengthy discussions about the two items that are on the agenda today, one being the repeal of the existing racial equity policy and also a discussion around what's being proposed. Toward the end of that discussion, and I wish I had done it earlier in the discussion, I suggested rather than wait until June 12th for our next scheduled meeting that we hold a special meeting. There were a number of people in the public that said, why are we waiting for another, whatever length of time that would be, 3-4 weeks? And so the next day or the day after, I requested this special meeting. And obviously, what's required to have a special meeting is one, there has to be a majority of the school board physically present. Members who cannot be present have the opportunity to participate virtually via Teams. And so at this point in time, and that's why we're here, because we have three of us. I don't know whether Dr. Posca and Mrs. Rosario are going to participate via Teams or not. But I'd like to ask Ms. Shattuck if she would review the process for calling a special meeting and confirm that in fact we complied properly, and then we can proceed accordingly. Ms. Shattuck, please.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. So the process for calling a special meeting can be found in your board policy 0165 on meetings, and it's also in Florida statute 1000.372, and it can be called if a majority of the board members request a special meeting, and that has occurred. And also then for the purpose of this meeting, we are having public hearings on the adoption of a policy and the repeal of a policy. So you also have a policy 0131 on legislative policy making, and that has your requirements for setting your public hearings, which require a 28-day notice, and that has also been done. And then also, you have your policies on setting your notice and agenda for your special meeting. So all of that has already been done. One thing I would note is that, on your meeting agenda in April, you did, when you approved setting the public hearing for the adoption of this new policy, safe, respectful, and inclusive education, and also the repeal of policy 2260.02, you approved advertising the public hearing. You did approve it for the June 12th meeting. And so I would say that it would be proper just to make a motion to amend what was previously adopted so that you have adopted setting the public hearing, but that you're just switching the date from June to May till today, and just noting that all of the requirements for setting it have been met.
All right, thank you, Ms. Shattuck. Well, with that recommendation, I would make a motion to amend the setting of the date from June 12th to today, May 24th, 2023.
Okay, I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion?
Yeah, I have one question. And it's okay to do that today, to switch the date?
Thank you, through the chair. So yes, that is okay, given that you have complied with all of those other requirements that I just went over for calling the special meeting and also for holding a public hearing.
Okay, and we're all board members provided with a Zoom link?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any discussion then? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. 3-0. Okay, would you please stand for the pledge? Join me in the pledge.
Oh, we should have done that very first.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning again. I'm asking everyone to please silence all of your electronic devices. And as Mr. Barefoot said earlier, in the event a special meeting is called, the agenda for such a meeting includes a statement of who called the meeting, and the meeting was called by Mr. Brian Barefoot. All right, we're going into the public hearing and adoption of Neola policy update to repeal policy 2260.02. On April 24th, the school board moved approval to set a public hearing date to repeal a district school board policy. The purpose of the revision is to be consistent with present practices and legislation. The policy change process was followed in accordance with Florida statutes under Florida Administrative Procedures Act Chapter 120. This item deals with the adoption of Neola policy update to the repeal of the policy. Dr. Moore, have you documented this public hearing was properly advertised in accordance with state statutes?
As just discussed by our attorney, yes, Madam Chair.
We now recess the meeting to conduct the public hearing as advertised. The public hearing is now in session. Dr. Moore, are there any written responses to the advertised public hearing to be read at this time?
There are no written responses.
Thank you. The public is going to be invited to speak, and at first I will read the citizen input guidelines. Each statement made by a member of the public shall be limited to 3 minutes. People will be recognized by the chair and will be asked to come to the podium. The time will start when the speaker is at the podium, and the school board attorney will be the official timekeeper. As you will see, the time clock is visible to your left on the dais. You will hear a beep at the end of your 3 minutes. Persons may speak up to 3 minutes during the public hearing. People may speak only once about any given item. And just a reminder, everything has to be related to either the repeal of the policy or the replacement. During the meeting, please refrain from clapping or outbursts of any sort so that we can proceed with dignity and with decorum by not infringing on any individual's First Amendment rights. I need to remind everyone to direct all comments to the chair, not to individual board members or the superintendent. As board members listen to citizens without interruption, citizens are asked to give board members the same respect. As per Florida Statute 1001-372, the presiding officer of any district school board may order the removal from a public meeting held by the district school board of any person interfering with the expeditious or orderly process of such meeting, provided each officer has first been issued a warning that continued interference with the orderly process of the meeting will result in removal. And if you have anything to give board members, please do so through Ms. Poisel. All right, I'll be calling you up one at a time and letting you know who's right afterward. All right, on the first hearing, I have Bonnie McDougall.
My name is Bonnie McDougall, and I am an independent who believes the extremes of both parties have gone too far and are harmful. I am a patriot who knows that this country was built from reasoned compromise. I love this country. I am against repealing the racial equity policy because what I want in my country is fairness, and what equity means is essentially fairness. It means creating a level playing field for all students. On Sunday, the NAACP issued a travel advisory for all African Americans to avoid traveling to Florida based on recent controversial policies, including a law banning colleges from spending public funds on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. During the signing of these bans, the governor said, quote, DEI is better viewed as standing for discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, quote. The governor's statement equates equity with exclusion. The question is exactly who is excluded from what. If you look at the AP history offerings at Vero Beach High School, you'll find these AP history offerings: AP World History, AP United States History, AP European History. You will not find AP African American History. Why? An AP course in African American Studies developed by the College Board has been blocked by the governor, who thinks, as he puts it, Black history is already taught in American history. As he said, quote, all the important things, that's part of our core curriculum, quote. How is it that a politician is qualified to determine what all the important things are in a history that is not his? How is it that his judgment trumps that of, for example, Henry Louis Gates Jr., the director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University, who was one of the major developers of this African American Studies AP course? I suggest that descendants of Africans brought to this land as slaves have a history that is different from that of migrating Europeans, and that they know that history better than descendants of Europeans do, and that it is African Americans who determine what all the important things in that history are. Some of that is not pleasant or tolerable, but it never works to hide the truth. And if Ruby Bridges, a 6-year-old young girl who had to be escorted by federal marshals into an all-white school in 1960 while crowds around her were screaming, if that child could endure that experience, then all of our children can surely bear to read about it. It is history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. Next is Jennifer Pippin.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Pippin, and I'm the chairman for Moms for Liberty here in Indian River County. I wanted to talk about the repeal policy, and there's been a lot of misinformation. I know a lot of it was discussed at the meeting on Monday, but for the people who didn't watch that meeting, didn't attend that meeting, this policy was approved in 2020 during COVID with the previous board. One of the board members here today approved it. And then a new law, House Bill 7, Individual Freedom Law, was signed into law on 3/10 of 22. That sparked the DOE to send the letter to the school district on November 18th of 22. The school district did not put this on the agenda for the December meeting. They did not put this on the agenda for the January meeting. It went on the agenda at the February meeting during Black History Month. I don't know if that was done on purpose or on accident. One of the school board members said that the optics was bad, but every school board member and the superintendent cabinet could have put it on when it needed to be addressed because the DOE flagged it. So fast forward to the May meeting now, because that was put off for another 2 months. So I personally sent a letter to the Department of Education with the original letter that was sent to the school district with the timeline and the meeting and the timestamps of what was said at that meeting and that it was pushed off 2 months. None of that was illegal, none of that was unethical. It was all, again, timestamps and the timeline, because the Department of Education doesn't remember every single notice that they sent out in the timeline to 67 districts. So then you get put in the newspaper, and everything that was in this newspaper and other newspapers and news across the county was wrong. And again, that was debunked in the Monday meeting, that this racial equity policy up for repeal is not tied to the desegregation order, never part of the 2018 joint plan, because this policy was implemented in 2020. It is not tied to any laws or statutes. If it was, the laws and statutes would be on the bottom of the policy like all other policies and board docs. And it is not tied to any court orders. So again, not the desegregation order, not any federal orders. This was done in addition to having other policies that the school district implements. So I just wanted to bring that to light, that this policy should have been updated March of last year when House Bill 7 was enacted. It was flagged by the Department of Education, and here we are almost a year later discussing the repeal of this policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pippin. Tammy Bogart, and then we'll have Thomas Kenny after Ms. Bogart.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to tell you I'm in favor of repealing this policy. That is not to say that racial equity isn't important, but it needs to be done in order to bring us into compliance with state statutes. In doing so, we need to tread lightly. One, because we don't want to open up the school district to litigation. And two, we don't need to receive another letter from the DOE or any other type of reprimand, fine, or elsewise. I also want to touch on the meeting date being changed. I understand what you're saying and why the meeting was changed, but the optics are not good. And it gives the appearance that there were 2 board members who were excluded, that it was rescheduled so that they would be excluded. Not saying that's what happened, but that's definitely the optics. I thank you for addressing this because it needs to be done, and granted, it may have been wise to handle this at an earlier date, but I appreciate the fact that you're addressing it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bogart. Mr. Kenny, and then we have Chris Keble.
I want to speak to this policy in view of the desegregation order, because oftentimes, particularly from the 3 of you who are here today, these policies, racial equity inclusion, the achievement gap policy, which was also passed in a packet and not debated on its passage, are done this way. The desegregation order. We have to do this because of the desegregation. We're under a desegregation order. You're not under a desegregation order. You are negotiating before a judge. You are writing the joint policy, the 2018 action plan, between the NAACP and this school district before a judge. And a judge says to you, in the management of those plans, whether it was 94 or 2018, the judge says, if you have a disagreement, work it out. Don't bring it into my courtroom. And then if you don't work it out, I'll assign you a mediator. Go to mediation and work it out, but don't bring it into my courtroom. If you change, because you're allowed to change those joint action plans, and the superintendent admitted on Monday night that they have done modifications, all you have to do is bring it to the courtroom, and the judge will say, Judge Sullivan will say to you, do you agree? Yes, we both agree. Because it's a joint motion action plan, you both filed it before the judge. This is how it works. And now out of these, quote, we're under a deseg order, actually you're under a dispute between 2 parties. If they honestly looked at the school system, would realize it's desegregated. It's one of the most integrated school systems here in this state, like every other one is. This would be taken care of. Well, everyone goes, whoa, 59 years, we haven't been desegregated. It's not because the judge would think so, it's because you guys can't come to an agreement of what desegregation looks like. Last year in 32963, it said that we're a minority-majority school system. And then the same writer is saying that we're under a deseg order and there's discrimination everywhere. Once again, this policy says in it that the superintendent shall look at the school system through a system-wide racial equity lens. It's time to look at the school system, like Martin Luther King would, through a system-wide character lens, and look at individuals. Repeal this policy, and there's no really reason to replace it with anything else. And we'll get to that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Chris Keble.
Hello, good morning. Morning is strange, isn't it? I was a teacher here for 33 years, so I'm kind of giving a little history from what I've seen happen in the past 56 years, whatever. And the title of my piece is The Soft Bigotry of Low Expectations. In November 2022, the state of Florida mandated our school system to stop our racial discrimination policy due to the lack of racism. It's been 56 years. 60 years ago, many families had 2 parents who were married, were stable, and our schools taught and students learned. Respect was prevalent. Then in order to garner votes, the federal government mandated free food, medicine, housing, and other benefits as long as the family had no live-in father. By now, many racial groups have chosen to dissolve their healthy family unit for major freebies. There are multi-generational, non-working so-called families producing young men with no father figure. This garnered low expectations of behaviors, including schoolwork. Dumbing down courses and giving grades, was never the answer. We have pushed hundreds of thousands of students through school to graduation who cannot read, write, do math, or think logically, all from the soft bigotry of certain political parties. Giving away free things doesn't look like bigotry, but like tolerance. Learning has taken a nosedive, and now we are using the discipline card. Administrators and law officers are treating discipline problems as a result of racism. Again, the racism dilemma. Result, chaos in many schools where students and teachers fear to attend. We have become an incredibly expensive daycare system. Half of our county taxes goes to the school system. Any other business like this would be bankrupt and closed down. Finally, these years of lowering expectations academically and behaviorally has made the term public education an absolute oxymoron. Look it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marsh, Michael Marsh.
Good morning, Michael C. Marsh. Back in Topeka, Kansas in 1956, the Brown versus Board of Education once said, you could be separate but equal. That wasn't many years ago, and if you think that sounds ridiculous, so does it in 2023 to repeal the equity policy. Remember, board superintendent, not every child comes to these schools here in the school district of Indian River County with the same abilities. We must provide the resources they need to achieve, not what is equal or fit. You repeal this policy. You also repeal economic equity, cultural equity. Remember, how can you have 50% of students of color when there is almost over 80% teachers that are white? Does that make sense? What also doesn't make sense that the two board members that spoke, we need this out, no more racial equity policy. They couldn't even come today to explain about being inherently racist. This board member said, we are saying that we're inherently racist. Systematic racism, that doesn't exist. We live in Indian River County. Not one person under the sound of my voice can tell me 5 African-American constitutional officers in the history of Indian River County. So we're not singling out the school district. This is a problem across the board everywhere, from law enforcement, from your tax collector, your property appraiser. This is what happens when you talk about repealing equity. My youngest daughter could not even participate in a Black History celebration at Oswald Middle School. Why? Because a few have allowed us to define equity. Equity for my child. They don't speak for my child. 3 schools in your school district had Black History celebrations. That's disgusting. 1 high school, 2 other schools. Why? Because God forbid we end up in a lawsuit. We chose to err on the side of caution. We have great legal counsel. Let them do what they need to do. Every other lawsuit, the fringe group lost. When this begun, a local hero news journalist said if there was an educational Mount Rushmore, you know who would be on the forefront of that? My chair, our chair, Doc Jones. I stand to keep this racial equity policy. A couple of years ago, it was a good word, equity. Everyone needs equity. Those were good words. Now, equality, inclusion, SEL, the CRT monster that we still haven't found yet, all bad words. We do not need another policy. We need to keep our racial and equity policy until things change here in Indian River County and our school district of Indian River County. So those 2 beautiful interracial queens, next Black History, get to have a celebration. More than 3 schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. That is all I had for the repeal of the policy, and the rest were on the adoption of the new policy. So I want to make sure I had everyone. Okay.
Dr. Jones, can I speak?
Yes.
I'm going to address a couple of things that were said. The original policy wasn't just voted on by me. It was voted on by Tiffany Justice, Laura Zork, Jackie Rosario, Mara Schiff. And that's back when we established this policy. Wasn't just myself. Those same individuals called numerous meetings during the day because they were stay-at-home moms. When Dr. Rendell was having all the issues, those meetings were called numerous times. I was the working person. I had to take several personal days in order to be here for specially called meetings, and there were several. Go back and look. I had an oath of office. If I can't be here, I'm going to be on the Zoom link if I can, or call in. That's totally up to the board member to attend or not attend, but all board members have been notified. All board members that care to be here are here.
Mr. Barefoot?
Nothing.
Dr. Moore? Okay. The chair concludes that the announced public hearing on adoption of Neola policy update to repeal policy 226002 has been conducted pursuant to notice, and that ample opportunity to address this issue has been provided to all. Okay. The board meeting is reconvened at this time. I call for a motion.
I move.
I'll second. Oh, sorry.
I move that the discussed policy be repealed.
Okay, moved by Mr. Barefoot, Ms. Berenborg second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of repealing racial equity policy 22602 signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, the vote carries 3-0. Our next item is the public hearing and adoption of new policy, safe, respectful, and inclusive education. The April 24th meeting, school board moved approval to set a public hearing date to adopt a new policy. Purpose of the new policy is to be consistent with present practice and legislation. Policy change process was followed in accordance with Florida statutes under Florida Administrative Procedure Act, Chapter 120. This item deals with the adoption of Neola policy, safe, respectful, and inclusive. Dr. Moore, have you documented that the public hearing was properly advertised in accordance with state statute?
As discussed by our board attorney at the beginning of the meeting, yes, ma'am.
We now recess the meeting to conduct the public hearing as advertised. The public hearing is now in session. Dr. Moore, are there any written responses to the advertised public hearing to be read at this time?
There are not.
Okay, the public is invited to address this issue at this time. I won't repeat citizen input guidelines. I believe everyone was in here. But again, reminder on this policy, you could just talk about the replacement. Okay, we'll go to citizen input. Robert Conley.
Thank you, Board. It's good to be back. I was not watching the clock, as you remember, on Monday night. And I think it's really important I came today because I really believe that our discussion here should be not political, not partisan, based on the values and principles of natural law and God's law. We're missing something in these discussions. Not on the agendas of what I call Marxist agendas. I mean, it's all about, I better put my glasses on, looking at the ideologies that are evident, you know? What we're doing now is, to what purpose? To what purpose are we implementing some of these discussions? It's really good versus evil is what it's about. And last month's couple of board meetings, I had the pleasure of seeing how much good that's being done, and you guys are great. What's going on in the school, you see the kids come up and read from Moonshot and all that, and I see the awards, and I see the beautiful campus, and everything is so good. Let's not let any of this bad come in, you know? When I come into the room the last 3 meetings, I feel the tension. I feel the tension today, you know? Let's get rid of that bad. Let's keep the good, you know? Don't let the tension fill the air. Sides form, arguments ensue. No part of this serves any purpose. If this is for the kids, this has to change. Good must not be tarnished by the bad. Bad drama played out in the newspapers, defaming each other, parents, rights leaders. I mean, it's dysfunctional in my mind, and it's dividing, it's divisional. And guess what that leads to? Some form of decadence, because there's decadence going all around the country. Not only in this area, we are not even touched by it. If you go around the national, look at all the school boards and all the uprising, there's violence, And it's decadent, and we cannot. This country was not formed on that basis. This country is formed on good Judeo-Christian values. There's no segregation, there's no anything. We're all God's people, you know? So it disturbs me to listen to some of these discussions. So I don't know if I'm for or against. I haven't even read the other, whatever's coming up next as far as legislation. But there's a national problem of good versus evil. So think about it. Think about what we're doing here, and think about what can we do not to have these dysfunctional, divisional type of things going on. I pray and hope that you heed some of what I'm saying, because it's really a personal thing, and I think we're all personally involved in these kids. I'm a grandfather, as you know, and I gave you some of my background. But more importantly, let's do it for the kids, not for these divisional type of discussions, you know? Let's look deep inside ourselves and say, really, look at all the good we did. Don't let it be dragged down, even a little bit. We're not nearly as bad as the rest of the nation. We're not bad. We're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Anthony Brown and then Edward Spencer.
Good morning, Anthony Brown. First and foremost, I'd like to say I've listened to all the misinformation, disinformation, trickery, and straight-out lies and foolishness over the last few months. But I want to go somewhere and give you some history. In 1909, February 12th, 70 people met in the basement of a Presbyterian church in Philadelphia. 60 of them were white, 10 were black, led by Mary Overton and W.E. Du Bois, who stood on faith that what was right they would stand for. Now, moving forward, here we are. The NAACP was born and raised, and now we are advocates for the rights of all people. Ladies and gentlemen of this board, you're in that moment in history where you will be somehow afforded down the road. If you look back to all of the people that came before you, who stood on faith, who stood on time, we could go on and on. Martin Luther King, that some people like to quote all of a sudden, he was not allowed to do anything. He was a villain. He was all of this prior to him becoming acceptable. You had all of these people who stood as you are standing now. I'll leave you with something that says, steadfast and immovable, abiding in good works. That is where you are today. I don't agree with the change, getting rid of the equity plan, racial equity, but it is what it is. I hate to see Dr. Moore in pinstripes. You know, I don't think they'll fit him too good, because we're being criminalized, weaponized, and attacked for doing what is right for all children. And you stand in the garden, and Madam Chair, it is an honor and a privilege that you did what you did, but you didn't have to do it. And you led the force to do what is right, as Dr. Moore eloquently says everywhere, for all children. And if that's the premise we're going to work in, we got to be doing it for all reasons. I applaud you. I know it's wrong, but my fight as the president of the NAACP and third vice president of the Florida State Conference is to fight this on another battlefield, but not delay the education of our children. I'll leave you with a Negro spiritual, because somebody used that word Negro in 2023 the other night, is let the work I do speak for me. Ladies and gentlemen, let the good work you do speak for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Edward Spencer, and then Bonnie McDougall.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to say a couple things. It seemed to be for our kids, it's like going into a fight. But one fighter has all his amenities in the other fight, and the other fighter don't have no arms. But we expect the fighter that has no arms to be equal to the fighter that have all his amenities. Doesn't work that way. I remember when I was in school and I was forced to stand up to that flag every morning. It was persistent and say the pledges of allegiance. I was forced to learn about pilgrims and Indians, forced to. No matter what I thought about it, I was forced to do that. Now we're here to, it seems like you still forcing me to learn your history, but yet you fail for your kids to learn my history. It seemed like you don't want them, when I say you, I'm not talking about you, the system. It seemed like you don't want your kids to hear my history because you don't want them to feel guilty. of what your fathers did. But my kids have to hear your history, and we've been guilty and angry all our lives of what happened to our forefathers. So I'm asking you to think about it. It's not fair. Black history is American history because it happened on what? American soil. So how can you elude the whoopings, the lynchings, the hangings, because you don't want your kids to feel a certain way about what your forefathers did? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Bonnie McDougall, followed by Jennifer Pippin.
I support the new policy, safe, respectful, and inclusive education. The proposed new policy states that under the teaching and learning section, that the school board pledges to, quote, give all students equal opportunity to succeed while building intentional supports to build student engagement, understanding, and achievement, especially for our most academically vulnerable students, end quote. This pledge is given against the backdrop of indisputable facts that have put African American students at a historic disadvantage. 3 facts make these disadvantages clear. Number 1, our public school curricula are based on European models of schools, largely anchored by European history. 2, in Florida's history before the Civil War in 1832, an 1832 law prohibited educating black people, slave or free. Number 3, after the Civil War, Florida adopted its constitution mandating, quote, a uniform system of public instruction, quote, yet these schools were segregated by race. African American students know that Florida public schools do not have a history of welcoming them. It is time for Florida to take actions that create a level playing field for students identifying as African American. It is time to find out from the African American families and communities what they think will create a level playing field for their young students. This new policy pledges to, quote, invite and include people from all diverse backgrounds to examine issues and find adaptive solutions, quote, and to ensure family and community engagement practices to encourage and enhance participation in schools and community forums, quote, with the desired end of providing what African American students, families, and communities determine will give African American students a level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. Ms. Pippin, followed by Bonnie Swanson.
Morning again. I just wanted to highlight a couple of exciting things that have gone on the past 2 years. So in 2022, the Sebastian River High School valedictorian, and that was last year, was African American. The Vero Beach High School top 5 scholars of 2022, 1 was African American. Let's fast forward to 2023. The Sebastian River High School homecoming queen was African American, and she was voted on by her peers. The Vero Beach High School prom queen this year was African American, voted on by her peers. Sebastian River High School, 6 out of 10 minorities, including 2 African Americans and 4 Hispanics, academically this year. I want you to take a step back from this policy and look at the cafeterias in our schools and see that all children sit together regardless of race. Look at the graduations, sports in our schools. All races and the 2 genders sit together. Look at the yearbooks and the staff represented in this room and in those yearbooks, all genders and all races sitting together. We don't have a social issue, a cultural issue, or an educational level of racism by just those stats I gave you alone. And I didn't even go into athletics, where again, the 2 races compete together against other schools and within this school district. The problem with this is we already have multiple policies that this policy has integrated into it. It's not tied to statute, it's not tied to the desegregation order, it's not tied to anything that we have to do. This is completely an optional policy. And with all of the other policies we have, I want you to ask before you vote on this, why do we have to add another policy if all of this is already implemented in other policies? All those stats that I just gave you, why? Why do we have to implement the policy when you see that children of both races are achieving academically? They're achieving by being voted on by their peers to be the prom queens, the prom kings. That's voted on by their other kids in their classes. Or maybe not even other kids in their classes. Maybe somebody they just met at a sports event, at the movies. We don't have a racist student problem in this district. We have an adult racist liberal assumption problem. We have an adult media blogging liberal assumption problem. And this is the minority in this county. And I'm not talking minority by race, I'm talking minority by numbers. So before you approve this policy or when you think about this policy, think about those stats, the facts, and the truth before you vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pippin. Bonnie Swanson, followed by Thomas Kenny.
Good morning.
Morning.
I need more than 3 minutes, but I'll only give you a few. First of all, as being with this school district for 40 years, I applaud you for the work that we have done for our children. And so I just want to say I applaud the school board for continuing to strive in developing an educational environment that surrounds all children with hope for a bright future. I want to thank you for your efforts to give the professional staff, those who serve the children, all the tools necessary to meet their extraordinary needs. And with that, that takes not being 48th in per pupil funding. It requires us to meet the demands financially that we can provide for all that we need to do in the school district. We all need to support all of you, and I thank you for all of your support to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Swanson. Thomas Kenny, and then May Asensio.
I'm a little miffed that I'm here at 8 o'clock in the morning at a special meeting. It's been said you only need a quorum, and you have the quorum here, obviously with the intent to pass this. One board member is a doctor. Apparently, some have said in this board already that this work is more important than him saving lives. Okay, whatever. But I want to speak to this policy because it talks about hiring practices that should be, non-discriminatory. District policies 1122, 3122, and 4122 concerning equal employment opportunity are already in place. The superintendent was questioned last night or Monday night regarding any extra policies concerning racial equity and things like that. There's no federal mandate for this. There's no state mandate for this. There's no desegregation order mandate for this. And there isn't any policy that hasn't already answered the questions in here. There's a lot of ambiguous language here. There's a thing about ESSA, but that's already answered too because that's state required for you to report numbers. Ms. Pippin made a reference, 7 out of 10. Top 10 academic achievers at Sebastian River High School, minorities. 2 out of top 5, African American. There's great, and then there's not great, across the whole spectrum for all kids. It's their individual agency that determines that. How do I know? Jaden Hughes. Last year, valedictorian, Sebastian River High School. He was on TV everywhere. West Palm, WPTV. Go watch the interview. It's very interesting because they asked him about this. They said, you realize that you're the first African-American valedictorian. It's a great honor. Awesome. And he said, no, I didn't know it, but when I found out, it just motivated me all the more. Because in actuality, the individual, Jaden Hughes, in his own agency, determined that he was going to be a med student at University of Florida. And he made that determination. So much so, his white counselor saw it in him and said, you can achieve this, and pushed him to do it. And he did it. He did it with great excellence. Very proud parents. His mom and dad instilled in him to do that, and to achieve. And so this policy doesn't go into those great stories. It's ambiguous and allows for silliness.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. May Asensio and then Reverend John Vaquero. Morning.
Good morning. Repealing 2260.02 because it is not compliant with HB 7, yet duplicating it with this new policy doesn't make any sense. It's been established that we have multiple policies already in place that address what this new one does, so it's basically unnecessary. The safe, respectful, and inclusive education policy also brings up some questions. The section purpose has a section saying that the board is committed to narrowing student discipline disparities for all students. So I'm wondering, what's the discipline disparity now? How much narrowing of this disparity is your goal? And will you discipline less or more to narrow this discipline disparity? And more importantly, is this a policy where you have to look at the student's skin before you decide on the discipline? The wording of the new policy is vague and nebulous, like eliminate practices that result in lower academic achievement. Are you saying Indian River County has practices currently that result in lower academic achievement? We'll develop and implement inclusive practices for and with our students, their families, and other community members. Well, where are these? Who are you not including now, and why? And reducing barriers to a safe and rigorous learning environment. So what are the barriers that we presently have that need to be reduced? You know, words are being used in this policy such as implement and develop, which indicates that they're not in place now. One would think that the board has not been taking care of business from reading this new policy. But I know that that's not true, because we already have policies in place to address these. We do not need this one. Please, do not make decisions solely on emotion, feelings, or for political reasons. Think what the purpose of these policies are. What are they truly meant to achieve, and do they even have measurable goals, or is this just fluff? And do we already have policies that fulfill these goals, making it redundant and unnecessary? Policies that are meant to please only a certain demographic or group are in actuality not inclusive at all. So ask yourselves, why are you really adopting this new policy? I respectfully request that you not approve the safe, respectful, and inclusive education policy, since we already have adequate policies in place that address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. John.
Good morning. I'd like to start again with our student prayer. Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. I moved to Indian River County in 1999, full-time minister, youth pastor as I began. Not once in these 24 years have I thought that our community was racist. Began youth ministry, built a responsibility list of teenagers of over 700. Began a bus ministry. We picked up kids from Gifford, Wabasso, and Sebastian. We began meeting first at Dodgertown Elementary, and then we got into the Gifford, at the time, Gifford Youth Activity Center, now Achievement Center. Also helped begin the first after-school program at the Gifford Youth Activity Center. Never once in those years have we ever had an issue with a student thinking, black or white, that our community was racist. The problems I came up with were the adults, the other pastors who said, "You're a white pastor, how can you minister to black children?" That's appalling to me to think that. Now I've had, over the 24 years, we began a private school. Some of those teens became adults. and they had kids. Now those African Americans send their kids to our school. If I was racist or they thought I was racist, why would they do that? We've had Chinese children. We've had those from Philippines come. Our community is not racist. Again, as it was already stated, we have an adult problem. I'd like to turn your attention to this book called Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House, written by Carol M. Swain. She's been a tenured professor at Princeton and Vanderbilt, a lifelong educator with the focus on critical race theory. Someone wanted to ask about this monster. Here's a quick definition of it. Critical race theory is a fundamentally racist worldview predicated on the claim that racism is the DNA of American institutions and society, as well as, in effect, in the DNA of white Americans. It sees minorities, especially black Americans, as victims of systematic racism permeating a vast network of impenetrable institutional structures and cultural stereotypes, all created by whites to give themselves unearned advantages. This depressing narrative states that government-sponsored racism did not end in the 60s, and when Congress passed 3 major civil rights bills to address the effects of Jim Crow racism, evidently nothing of real consequence took place following the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which mandated the advertising of jobs and banned discrimination based on race, color, sex, religion, and national origin. Likewise, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Opening Housing Act of 1968 did little to deinstitutionalize racial discrimination in American law and society. Can we move forward with some common sense, please? Thank you.
Reverend. Michael Marsh, and then my last speaker is David Flint.
Morning again. Michael C. Marsh, proud parent, activist, and community healer. I stand in support of this policy. Since we can't have equity, we might as well have something that's, I guess, called something similar to it. But why do we even have to do this? You know, that huge parental outcry because of equity. I mean, look, there's hundreds of parents in here saying equity was bad, right? Nope, not once. We did this just to appease a few. But let's look at why we even need a policy about safe, respectful, and inclusive education. You're still under a deseg order, right? Let's talk about how the local hate group calls your NAACP a black supremacist group with a pic of our Kevin Browning, who was part of the work group. That's why we need a safe, respectful, and inclusive education. 70-year-old white woman Mahil tells us how blacks should feel. She used a different word. That's why we have to have a safe, respectful, and inclusive policy in our education. A former school board member once called me in the last race and said, Marsh, I need you to help me. They're calling me racist. How can I be racist if I have a black grandchild? Thank God she lost. Chances are, when you can count your black friends, black family members, the number of successful black students in public and private education, you may be a bigot, prejudiced, racist deity. But don't worry, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for each one of you. All board members have been notified. All of them. But are they all here? They are not here. Why? Because maybe for them, it's not important to have safety, respect, inclusion within the school district. Today in history, I want you to remember this day. Remember the yays, remember the 2 nays. It's funny that we quote Martin Luther King Jr., because remember, most of his books are bad, right? CRT, books bad, but Martin Luther King Jr., he's good for at least today. But he once said something, and I quote, silence is violence, right? Well, let me tell you exactly. The ultimate tragedy, King once said, it's not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. He was right. If you're good, yet silent, maybe you're not really as good as you think. And again, today, what speaks volumes to me is the 2 that are not here. Silence is violence. I stand in support that we adopt this policy on this day for safe, respectful, and inclusive education. And I don't need anyone telling me how I should parent my interracial children. We are about transforming education to inspire and empower all students to maximize their full potential.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Last speaker is David Flint.
David Flint, father, business owner, longtime volunteer with youth organizations, former youth pastor, just member of the community who just cares about our kids. Madam Chairwoman, thank you. School Board, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here this beautiful morning in Indian River County. The issue that I chose to speak on is the safe, respectful, inclusive education policy. I believe that this policy speaks to all students in the community to assure them that they will be treated safely, respectfully, inclusively. And you've heard many things about this policy. You've heard opinions on why it should not be in place, reasons to why it is needed. I know there are differing positions on where this policy stands in regards to the DOE and to state statutes and such like that. It's been stated that this is an optional policy, and I believe that's a correct statement. I don't believe that the DOE is forcing this. I don't believe that the DSEG order is forcing this. It's an optional policy. I believe that makes it that much more powerful. The safe, respectful, inclusive education policy speaks to every student in Indian River County, puts a policy in place to ensure that every student in Indian River County is treated in that manner. The word all is important because it includes all, including people of color. For any that would say that this is not a policy that's needed, it's not valid, or would undermine the work being done here, I would simply say that equal rights for others does not mean fewer rights for you. It's not pie. And aside from a cute shirt and catchy slogans, which I wholeheartedly embrace, this is important. This is important to my children. This is important to the children of Indian River County, ensuring that all are treated equally. It was important enough for me to take time out of my day to put my morning on pause, to tell my kids they get a little less dad time this morning, but I'll see you later because I've got to go be a part of something bigger than me. And I look forward to sharing with them later today what our school board does when they put this policy into place. And I look forward to being able to look back at this point in history and know that you stood on the right side of history by siding with respect and inclusion for the students of Indian River County. Board, Chair, thank you again.
Thank you. That was our last speaker. Any comments from the superintendent?
No, ma'am.
Board members?
I have a couple of comments. I don't know whether it's appropriate to offer them now or when we go back prior to making a motion to vote.
Do either.
A couple of things. First of all, I'd like to defend Dr. Posca and Mrs. Rosario. I've sat with Mrs. Rosario for, I don't necessarily always agree with her, but I've sat with her for the last number of years, and Dr. Posca just recently. As a matter of fact, in a workshop, I think maybe one of the most outspoken people about addressing school discipline and safety was Dr. Posca. So I just want to be on the record that I would defend both of those individuals, even though they're not here, whether they should or shouldn't be here, based on their desire to see safe, respectful, and inclusive schools. They may disagree whether it's needed or not, but you cannot suggest that they're not in favor of these kinds of practices being in place. So the other thing I'd like to address is, and I would like to thank all of you for speaking because you certainly have spoken from your heart. One of the problems was setting policy. I know there were some of you ladies spoke to, she'd like more specificity in the policy. How do we narrow the achievement gap? How do you measure that? Each year, and every 3 to 5 years, the district has goals and objectives. They have a strategic plan, and in those goals and objectives and strategic plan, these kinds of measurement standards are put forth by the superintendent, discussed with the school board, and ultimately adopted. So at the end of that period of time, we can actually look and see, have we made progress in addressing the very general themes that are in this policy? It's not appropriate, in my opinion, to put that much specificity in a policy, but it is appropriate to make sure your goals, standards, and objectives, measurement standards and objectives, are in place and that we hold all of us, teachers, principals, administrators, and school board accountable for the results. If it's important enough to put these broad generalizations in a policy, it's important enough to take the time and make the effort to be very specific about what we hope to accomplish in that period of time. So I wish this policy in many respects wasn't necessary. I think I said back, Mrs. Pippin will remind me of the length of time it's taken to get here. It's unfortunate it's taken so long, but here we are. I think that there's so many policies, 3, 4, 5, that this is sort of a summary of all of the others. Yes, in some respects it's not necessary because everything's already there, but if I were a parent coming into Indian River County and I listened to some of the dialogue, if at the very least this sort of summarizes what is already in 3, 4, whatever the number is, policies. You don't have to search through a book that's that thick of policies to find one that at least covers the gamut. And so if for no other reason, I view this as a good summation of the 3 or 4 other policies that already are in place. I'm obviously in favor of this. I wish it wasn't necessary, but I think in the time and place, it is necessary, and I intend to support it. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Berenborg?
Yeah, thank you for your comments about the other board members. Appreciate that. You know, it doesn't hurt to have this policy, I believe, because it's kind of like the parental rights bill. You know, that wasn't an original bill. That was taking other bills and putting them together in one place so somebody had kind of a one place to know what their rights were as a parent. And it was good. I think that's the same thing here. You know, it's putting things together that we already have, and it's putting them all in one spot for people to really appreciate. And the last part of this policy says the board directs the superintendent to provide all students with this significant opportunity to receive a fair, inclusive, high-quality education to maximize their full potential. It says all students. And I wonder how many people actually read the whole policy and not just picking apart excerpts, because people like to do that. They like to read a book and just pull out excerpts to read. Read the whole thing. Look at why it's here. You're right, we do have an adult problem. If I was watching this from the outside thinking of moving here, I'd think twice. It's sad. Our kids are watching. They're watching adults and how we behave and how we include some and not all. Shame on us as adults. I'm done.
Okay. Just a few words. Obviously, I worked with Dr. Shafty on this policy, and we went through the board, got comments, went back to the board, then Dr. Moore emailed to us and to see if we had any other additions or edits. And I think about the first policy that we repealed, and I think about the same. To do things right for the first one. State statute policy follows that, making sure that we are in agreement with everything on state statute and we don't put the district at risk. So do things right. And when I think of safe, respectful, and inclusive, do the right thing comes to me. As Ms. Berenborg said, it's for all students. As Mr. Barefoot said, it's for bringing it all together like we did in some other bills. But think about that. A manager does things right. You get everything right as far as state statute. Doing the right thing is what this board is looking at for all students. So I just wanted to add that. The chair concludes that the announced public hearing on the adoption of Neola new policy on safe, respectful, and inclusive education has been conducted pursuant to notice and that ample opportunity to address this issue has been provided to all. The board meeting is reconvened at this time. The chairman calls for a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Okay, the motion in favor of adoption of new policy, safe, respectful, and inclusive education. Those agree, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. No one opposed? Okay, that carries 3-0. Board members all had your input so far, nothing else? Make sure. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for viewing or coming out this morning for our special meeting. At this time, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. The time is 9:05.
Thank you.